you know, and that's frustrating and impatient. But if we're driving to the call and like, this person's an idiot, blah, 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 that's affecting our state of mind because our point of focus is on something that's just not productive.
Hey, Ben.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Good morning, Ben. Can you hear us well?
Yeah, totally. Great.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so we had a little heat in the background, so now we can hear you better as well. Our office is cold. It's high in the air on the 5th floor, so it gets chilly up here.
Yeah.
So, Ben, good morning. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. I know we had some back and forth on nailing down a good time, but we finally made it, and here we are. So, but no, thanks for joining us, Ben. I gave a brief introduction of you. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff out. So if you just want to give us and you know, the audience a little bit about yourself and probably go into the functional man a little bit, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is my first IG Live, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Well, guess about me. You know, you've got the basics. I've been a firefighter and paramedic for 23 years, and I've been on the peer support team at South Metro, I think, for, gosh, 6 or 7 years now. I've had various roles in that peer support group, the coordinator for a while, and that's kind of where the functional man came out when I was going through, you know, my own struggles in life. So I'm 55 now, like a lot of people in middle age, right? I'm a single divorced father. Challenges with work, personal challenges, which is what gets a lot of us interested in peer support, at least in the fire service, in my experience, is going through things and wanting to give back. And it just resonated with my mission in life, and my purpose really is to have a positive impact on the world and use the things that I'm particularly interested in to the benefit of both myself, but more importantly to others. Because I find that's a great synergy they give back to each other. So the functional man, where the name comes from, is I was introduced to CrossFit back in the day, kind of an old school CrossFitter, and one of their big philosophies is functional fitness, which is train and exercise in a way that allows you to succeed and be able to function the best in life. Doing things that, you know, that you'll be doing in real life, whether that's in my job of the fire service, which involves, you know, wearing 70 pounds of gear when we're carrying our stuff in our air pack, to advancing hose, to be able to move upstairs. So all of the physical components of it, or, you know, Barbara is an athlete, and, you know, Brian is, you know, rucking when you're in the infantry, is trained for what real life is going to provide us. So I have a really good friend, and we would just drive home from work, carpooling together, and kind of discuss how so frequently people were just shooting themselves in the foot, right? And then being so dysfunctional and being so apparent. And I really wanted to help people out to actually be able to show up and perform better. So that's where the functional man came from. And it's not, I want to be clear, it's not just about men and males, it's about functional mankind. So I work with everybody. Anyway, on that peer support team, as I was trying to come up with an organizing principle about how I could just show up in the world better, and understanding the things that led to personal struggles in my life or areas where I was frustrated, I came across a book called Flourish. It's by a guy named Martin Seligman, who you guys know well. So he was a president of the American Psychological Association, but he really reinvigorated the concept of positive psychology in the United States. And the world, really, which is what there's clinical psychology, I guess, which is helping people get from states of distress and dysfunction kind of back to a baseline where they're normally. And positive psychology is just this systematic study of what people can do to perform better. So I kind of describe it as a scale of, you know, let's say humans can operate on a scale of -50 to +50, and 0 is kind of baseline, is kind of what most people think of psychology as getting people from that negative scale back to baseline, and positive psychology is getting them from baseline to +50. what I find interesting is that really used to be the whole breadth of psychology. It didn't differentiate about, I guess, clinical psychology helping people, but it's like, how do people perform? And so that was really interested. Yeah. So as I was the coordinator for our peer support team, and peer support teams grew out of the recognition that the jobs are impactful in emergency services. There are what we now describe as stress injuries, which we'll get into in a bit, occur, and it's an occupational hazard for really everybody, but also particularly military and emergency responders. And so I kind of lost my train of thought, but back to flourishing as peer support. That's where I am.
Yeah.
So peer support had been instituted to help people through those issues, but it's super valuable. But I recognized that we were really in a reactive stance. We were there for people. You know, one of the main descriptors, job descriptors for our peer support team, when people say, well, what do I need to do on the team, is one is you need to understand yourself and others in basic things, but you need to answer your phone. We need to, we want to be available for people. I saw the opportunity to move from that reactionary stance to something that a proactive and engaged stance to teach people the skills so that they could be more capable of handling and mitigating these things that we know that they're going to expose. And so from Martin Seligman's book, Flourish, which one of my top recommendations, he just laid out what it is to flourish. We'll get into that. But when I said, wow, there's actually research-backed, evidence-backed strategies and tactics people can take to perform better in the world, that I was all in. And so I wanted to start teaching that to the people in my department first and foremost. And that's where the functional man came out. So I started to do it in a peer support role, teaching that. And then, so I'm 55, which is about normal retirement for a lot of emergency services, mid-50s. I strongly believe, and what I teach is that humans perform much better when we have a positive focus to look forward to than when we're reacting to things or when we have no focus at all. And so my positive focus is, this is my next career, and I'm super excited because I'm blessed enough to have worked through a process to find out where I'm going, and I'm excied about where I'm going. So I'm who knows when I'll leave the fire service, but I'm excited about what I have forward. That's what the functional man is about, and that's how the name came about.
Yeah. Wow. That's really awesome. And I'm really actually appreciative of this IG chat because, in all the different discussions we've had with you, that's a lot of great information that seems really useful, one, but two, really aligns with who we are and what we're about. So I think this connection here that we have and we'll have hopefully going forward is absolutely valuable then. And I remember you talking about that a lot before in different conversations though as well, the proactivity piece. As we're looking at positive psychology or even what, we do is the performance psychology piece, that's what we're really getting after is proactively getting after some of these deeper clinical issues, preventing them from even, seeking to prevent them from even happening, especially in these high stress occupations, these high stress environments, because inevitably the stress is going to be there. So how do we arm folks in the right way to handle that appropriately, process it appropriately, so that it doesn't develop into a deeper clinical issue? So that's great. And it sounds like you do a lot or incorporate a lot of what you do with Functional Man in your department and across South Metro when you can.
Yeah, every day. I mean, that's what I'm seeing the lens through, right? So people kind of see me coming now. And to that end, I think, performance psychology and positive psychology is the same thing. We're just looking for, it's semantics in a way, which is important when we're determining what audience we're talking about. But, on that scale of health and wellness, if we're very, very fit, by definition, we're healthy and well. And so when we can get people moving more towards that, then we're inoculating them. I don't want to get stuck in technical terms, but we're inoculating against those, exposures and whatnot. And when people have those skills that they can readily go back to, then they can keep up their performance. And so instead of saying, and definitely, just along that line, so people like, I know the state that I want to be in and that I strive to be in to perform at my best, those states are naturally resilient. So I throw resilience in there when we're talking about really high resilience skills or resilience IQ. I think I just coined that term, that, people are not only going to perform better, but they're going to be less likely to be harmed. And something I've been thinking about, and where I try and bring it into the fire department a lot, is we're such social animals. Our state of mind impacts everyone around us. And so I use this to kind of teach people that might be a little bit skeptic or they feel like they're all good. The better your state of mind and the more productive it is, you're benefiting those around you. And even if it's not verbally, these are these positive, energetic people that other people want to be around. And so we're just, it's cumulative, it's circular, it's all interconnected. We get into these things, and I mean, the lines and stuff that you can draw are basically endless.
Yeah.
I had this thought after the first piece you talked about the future, and this is your direction going forward. And I had this thought that I hope that we will be continuing this collaborations and chats and discussions and work together for other 40 years. So hopefully this will happen.
We know you're already almost there, Ben, so 40 years is a lot.
If I'm doing, forward-thinking, engaged work at 95, I don't really think that's beyond the realm of possibility, because I think, just to get into kind of some nuts and bolts about, what allows people to perform, it's having something, Barbara, that they're engaged in, and that keeps our minds active, that keeps our minds flexible. And so, I think these skills and engaging in life in that real purposeful way, hell, I'm going to set that as a goal. I'm going to be working with AEE when I'm 95, because that's going to allow me to continue to grow as a human being and keep my mind active, which is, when we stop growing, we start dying.
Well, now you have two accountability people here, so you cannot give up.
All right.
But along with that, honestly, what you just talked about in regards to the energy and the impact on others, I'm sure I'm not the only one that sees the energy in you, and that's something I mentioned at the very beginning before you hopped on. And it's so crucial and something we see in our work as well. And it talks about work culture, or it touches on work culture, how you communicate non-verbally, and what is your mindset at the moment of collaboration with others as well. And it's surely something that builds that organizational resilience, probably too. Do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I think, there's so many different ways to look at psychology and physiology, but, we're at the same time that we're individuals and isolated in the way that we think and react, we're also part of this group. I mean, we're social animals. Just as an aside, I try and help people understand how the animal in them is reacting, which means to say, speaking to a lot of the physiology that we have in common that's operating in the background. So really that survival brain, that emotional and sensory motor part of it, and then that human part. And so, I think, we're individuals within a tribe, and our tribe expands and grows, and it's made up of personal life and social life, which are part of it, and work life as well. So it's so interconnected. Just looking at, one of your questions, or I think you guys asked it, is how do I use it in my line of work, is, my kind of big organizing principles, the three about how do you be more resilient, is to, one, use and move your body. That's a skill we can get into. And then just develop greater awareness. And that's both awareness, or all awareness of ourselves, like personally, how does Ben O'Brien operate, but how do I operate as just an organizational, organism, an animal, and then also that awareness of that environment that you're in and how it reacts to. And my big thing to introduce what I wanted to say of how I use it is be disciplined with your focus. I was just driving home and talking to my good friend, the same guy that I helped form. We came up with the Functional Man, and we were discussing how I think we had both run heroin overdoses, two different units, heroin overdoses, and he's in a part of town where they're running more socioeconomic or people that are living on the street, and it's really it's easy to start to judge and to denigrate those people, and without going into any of their values. But what we spoke about was that one of the guys on his crew was like, this guy's sucks. He's not a worthy individual. He's using much more colorful language, but devaluing that person, it only hurts me. So when my job is around, if I'm focused on the fact that I'm running these people that I think aren't, doing well, or they suck, or any other number of languages, then it just devalues what I do. So that doesn't mean I have to like them. That doesn't mean I have to say, oh, they're a wonderful human being. But that point of focus is really important. So when you're just you're devaluing your work and hurting that, or one of the things we do in the fire service a lot, and it's definitely frustrating when you're up at midnight to be, fixing someone's, or not even fixing, running on someone whose smoke detector batteries have died, right? If they just take the smoke detector off and read the back of it, one chirp every 30 seconds means it's new batteries, and that's frustrating and impatient. But if we're driving to the call and like, this person's an idiot, blah, 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 that's affecting our state of mind, because our point of focus is on something that's just not productive, So, and it takes that disciplined focus of state of mind, I think is where I use it, and just trying to point that out in a non-preachy way. And it's just like, when I have that state of mind and that focus that's negative, I feel worse, and I actually perform worse too, which is a lot of stuff what you folks are great about, is teaching where you're focusing and how your state of mind, the whether it's positive, neutral, or negative, impacts how well you perform.
Yeah.
Do you have something?
I do, but you have something too.
Okay,
you go, and then I'll go.
No, just a huge thing, Ben. Along with the awareness, because without the awareness, you don't know that it actually has a negative impact on your performance. So the awareness, it really starts with it, and there's no awareness without focus. So these two concepts are so interrelated and so crucial. There, we take them as the basis, basically, of what we do as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's just something I wanted to throw into that. And awareness and focus, and I don't want to go too far into that, but we briefly discussed mindfulness yesterday in our discussion, and mindfulness is just the game of attention, focus, and creating the awareness, so you can actually adjust and respond based on what is the bigger picture, what is, so you don't just react automatically, and for example, you get pissed or frustrated when something happens, something like what you explained or mentioned just a minute ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it ain't easy, right? I know. I heard that the Dalai Lama, I think, meditates like at least 6 hours a day to maintain that equanimity. And I'm not espousing that, but it's not an easy game. But agreed.
Yeah, it's not, but there's a good amount of research on just practicing 10 minutes a day, and with significant results in specific areas of the performance and mental state.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, because on that note, like we mentioned as well, it's about changing that brain. I mean, this reactivity and impatience or frustration about something you feel is stupid or whatever is our natural human reaction, right? And so we're fighting against that so that we can maintain our performance where it needs to be. And so we want to change our brain patterns of what we're typically used to. And that's what we see as we work with emergency responders out there, or just people in general, is we have a lot of these things that are habitual. They're not always the most productive, right? And we don't realize that until we bring some awareness to that,
right? And
then we realize, hey, I probably should change that, and that's our uphill battle. Our being the three of us here and others out there like us.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is just the one part of awareness is the fact that the way that you're thinking doesn't have to be the way that you're thinking. People aren't even aware that they have a way of thinking. So much of it, I come back to the story, or the example of fish swimming in the ocean, and someone, hey, you're swimming in the ocean. Like, I am? That's just your environment.
Right.
I know when I teach or cajole people at work into doing mindfulness, maybe around the table at morning meeting, is like, what was the experience like for you? Just sit down and quietly for one whole minute and breathe and focus on your breathing. And so much of the time, that's a totally different experience than their daily going through life. They're in their checklist, their should statements, all of those things. But, oh, wow. Like, hey, guess what? That's your brain working in the background, and that's just what it does. So even to get someone to stop and breathe and not talk and turn the radio off and turn the TV off and not look at their cell phone, it brings awareness to what's going on underneath.
Yeah. One other area or point I want to make, that where my mind goes as well, as we're talking awareness to what we're doing, how productive it may not be, but also the impact that how we are showing up impacts others. It makes my mind go to something that Barbara and I have done, and there's a huge connection to resilience, but burnout, right? And in the way that we kind of approached it, there's an individual component to burnout prevention, right? Burnout prevention, and then a collective component to burnout prevention, and how that overall prevention piece really starts with us, and having things like growth mindset, implementing concepts such as mindfulness, breathing, proper recovery within ourselves, and then that allows us to show up better from day to day, and then allows us to also engage with others then appropriately, right? There's that impact that we have on others that we work with, but even others that we engage with through our jobs, providing health services or emergency services to people. But it makes me think about burnout and the connection with resilience there. And I wanted to hit on something, and maybe we start going in that direction, but we talked about it the other day as well, stress continuum. One of your posts on your profile I really liked. It was when you showed like the brief stress continuum. I think health model is like the whole name of it. And you said something in there about like having that more, so when we're experiencing stress on the job or in life, having that more descriptive language, better than, hey, I'm just doing okay, I'm just doing fine, or I'm stressed, right? Having that more descriptive language helps us to better understand ourselves and engage with others. Well, we've learned that with burnout, it's a spectrum. One end of the spectrum is engagement, the other end is burnout, right? And so where are we within that spectrum? We want to move more towards that engagement with ourselves, as we're talking about that awareness. Where are we? How are we showing up? How are we managing that stress as well? But also engaging with others, right? And so as we move toward that spectrum, towards more engagement, that's with ourselves, with others, understanding ourselves, that's where we want to be ultimately as we talk burnout. But stress continuum model and seeing the connection with resilience there, but also with burnout, just kind of wanted to kind of throw that your way as well, Ben. If you can talk to us a little bit more about that, 'cause I love that. And I always really enjoy hearing you talk about it as well.
Thanks. So are you, I'll talk about anything you want, but kind of discussing the benefits and the reason behind more granular language? Or like the stress continuum, or how it goes in the stress continuum?
Yeah, the more granular language, as well as how you see that connecting to, I think, what we talked about, improving one's resilience so that they're showing up better each day.
Yeah, so, like we talked about earlier, so what your point of focus matters. And the closer your point of focus, or the narrower it is, the smaller it is, the more likely you're going to move in a positive direction or towards that. So for people that are military or shooters, right, it's aim small, miss small. I'm sure that's way in tennis, right? If you're looking to hit that corner at the baseline and the sideline, really looking there, you're more likely to get close to it versus, having a softer focus and I'm just going to crank the ball over the net. And if it goes in the grandstands or hits the side judge or whatever, good enough. So aim small. And so what the granular language does is it allows us to have a better assessment of ourselves in the situation. So one thing that works in the 911 field is that the gatekeeper to the 911 field is the person with the cell phone that calls 911. And they're generally going to be triggered or they have a problem that's overwhelming them, so they call that. So the dispatch information that we get is, generally it's overgeneralized, it's not very specific, and people also don't have experience. So if we look at something like, what's a good idea? Here's a good idea. We go on car fires, right? So cars get pulled over, and we oftentimes get called to cars where their radiator's overheating. So there's white steam coming out, and people say the car is fully involved. So a car that's fully involved looks like something out of a movie, right? Every part of it is burning on fire, or in a structure fire. So our job on a structure fire is to show up, and that first officer that gets there does an on-scene report. So how big, what do we got in front of me? So I have a medium-sized structure. Do I have fire showing? Do I have smoke showing? Do I have nothing showing? So getting more nuance. So I've got, light smoke. I've got heavy smoke. I've got fire. I've got heavy fire. Where is it coming from? And all these things are more granular things that's telling his crew and the rest of the people showing up there the jobs that they're potentially going to do. So I've got a mega home. I've got heavy fire showing off the Charlie side, which is the back side. That's a descriptor. Engine 16, we're going to be, in fast attack mode, which tells us something else. But what we got over the dispatch was just house on fire or something like that. And then we show up and we give it more granular stuff, very specific stuff, which allows people to act more specifically. And what that allows us to do as a fire department when we show up is to take the most efficient, but also, the safest action in order to mitigate that fire. So, the other thing is we have parties trapped or everybody's out. That's going to tell another unit what their potential assignment is going to be. And so that's what I see as this granularity. It's well, what exactly is going on with you? I've got I have a little graphic. It's, we all know binary, so ones and zeros, which is the language of computers, and that's not the language of us. We're not computers. We're not either fine or we're broken. We exist on this continuum that's changing all the time. So what granular language does is it allows you to understand what your current state is in a more nuanced way, and it allows you to get some insight into what is causing that state, the external stressors, external circumstances, and then your internal reaction to them. And then that way we can take more precise action. So in the days of the Civil War, if someone had an injury in their lower leg, they cut their leg off. That doesn't happen now. We have better assessment, we have better tools. And so the more you can be precise in your action, the less harm is going to take from that, but the more likely it is to be successful. So we get this, I know in peer support, for example, people say, I'm burned out, I'm stressed, I'm freaking out, I just need not to be here, and they want to quit. But if we can understand, maybe there's particular calls or there's traumatic exposures that they have run that we can help them work through, or they're feeling burned out by a particular position. So paramedics are an example. In my fire department, I go back, paramedics have a big job load. They're in charge of the majority of our calls because 60-something% of our calls are medical calls. So there's a paramedic that's attending. They're responsible for a lot of information gathering and treatment and report writing. Sometimes it's what exactly is making this place, South Metro Fire Rescue, not work for you? And maybe it's the fact that, like me, I was a paramedic for 17 years and I was burned out. And now in hindsight, it's so obvious, but I needed to leave. I'd no longer be a paramedic. And now I find a ton of gratitude and fulfillment and a sense of accomplishment in being a firefighter. It's in a lot of ways a simpler role, but I get to use my experience now to help others. So I get to work with the rookies and help train them. A lot of times we'll have more junior officers that are coming in. They're not as familiar with the district or an acting engineer. And so I feel like I get to serve the internal customer, my peers, as much as I serve the others. So all of those things are products of me having a more nuanced, a more granular idea of the things that were causing me stressors in life. And I can get personal and get, more specific about the things, for example, and I'm happy to share, that ended up in the end of my marriage, so it wasn't just that, she was an asshole and I was an asshole. It's like a much more granular stuff.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the big benefits is that, my former wife and I, and now we have a very good and productive relationship. Not only are we good co-parents, but we're actually friends, and we're both like, yeah, we're not married anymore. And that's the right thing because we understand, the little things that happened. And so we can see those things. Then they have just the final point to wrap it up. Things are less emotionally loaded when we can label them accurately.
I like that. Wow. That's a lot of things.
No, I actually wanted to ask about when you mentioned you were burned out as a paramedic, and you continued it now with the personal life, and so often it's so interrelated. I would assume or guess that there might be some relationship between the professional life and personal life, and both affecting each other. But we don't have to go there, but I'm curious if you, with the knowledge that you have now, with the bigger perspective probably you have now, more experience, what would you tell yourself, your paramedic self back then, or what would you do differently in those times when you were burned out?
Barbara, I would have left. I would have seen that my career as a paramedic had run its course, and that the circumstances, the work circumstances of paramedics now versus 20 years ago when I started are different, and they're not. They're beyond my control. So that's the one thing is focus on the things, understand what you can control, and then take action for those things. And the things that you can't control, you literally, our only choice, if we're going to move forward in a beneficial, positive way, is to accept those things and just accept them and move on and not focus on them. So I think I would have just gotten to the point of dropping my paramedic certification and changing my role in the fire department earlier. That's the one thing is like, hey, what's the reality? What can you control? And so I would have controlled my external circumstances. And that's not something that always happens. Most of the time we can't change our external circumstances. And most of the time our external circumstances they're literally only one part and probably less than half of what's causing us, whatever negative reaction that we're having.
Yeah, a lot of that reaction is on us and how we're responding to those external circumstances.
Yeah.
It's almost all on us. Yeah, it's almost
absolutely.
all on us. You're right. I mean, that's exactly what you two, I'm going to call you gals, right? Because no, you guys. I mean, that's what you're teaching, right? Well, I mean, that's what, the folks from your program, from the DU program came in and were teaching our firefighters who were struggling with, the new physical fitness duty test is what can you control and where your point of focus is. And I think that a really good example is of athletes. So, I like to watch the NFL, and mainly I'm just blown away by the athleticism and the ability for a wide receiver, to be running down the field with a person draped all over him and catch a small object that's traveled 40 yards through the air, right? But if they're worried about it's the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl, and if I drop the ball, then for sure they're going to have hands of stone. And that is the epitome of the power of positive focus. Is just like focus on that thing that you can control in the moment, and other things they'll work. What happens, but you don't have control over.
Yeah. Totally. Boom.
Mic drop.
Just a comment on that. The research shows that people that are burned out have perceived of a lack of control. So that's something that is widely spread across the research, and specifically people that are burned out, they focus on stuff that cannot control. And of course it's natural because we focus on things that don't work, and usually those are that we can't fully control, or or we focus on those pieces that we cannot control, and therefore we don't control it at all because we don't control or we don't do anything about those parts that we can actually control.
Yeah, so one thing that's recurred to me a lot, or just because I read, and I'm not necessarily an original thinker. I'm not an original thinker. There's a lot of people that are, but is that this concept of our emotions drive our focus. And so for anybody that's listening to this that's younger, right? So for example, if you're a 20-year-old man or woman and walking down the street, you're paying attention to other 20-year-olds, and either if it's in a romantic interest or in a challenging interest or whatnot, you're not noticing the old people like me, that are walking down the street. I mean, and literally, it's a funny thing we can get into, but and so your emotions, because you're more emotionally tied to that, that's driving your focus. And I think what I understand is burnout is much more prevalent as the size of an organization gets larger, right? And you have less control. Back in our circumstances at South Metro Fire, in my career, we've merged 4 times. So we've taken in, and people are focused on that threat. So they have that emotional tie to what their department was or what their role is. We also don't like change, right? As humans. So change is like, I don't like it. And so we're focusing on all those changes, and our emotions can be more negative, and we're focusing on the change and those things that we don't control. And then that contributes to the burnout, right? Because that's a lot of what burnout is just this sense of out of control. We're disengaging kind of emotionally. You can probably tell me a little bit more about that, but we're pulling back from things. That's part of that burnout. We're separating ourselves from these things that don't feel good emotionally. And so, we're less involved, and consequently it's that negative spiral.